We begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded and shared. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and to the ongoing storytelling traditions of First Nations people across the many countries of this continent. Breda, welcome to Solid Yarns, a podcast about First Nations creatives and their practices. I'm Emran Japanunga Sultan. I'm a West Narrandera, Luritja and Cookatha man, creative artist, cultural consultant and co-founder of Solid Lines. We're here to chat about how industry partners and First Nations creatives can best work together. Each episode we'll hear from a First Nations creative and the client they worked with. We'll hear about the project they made, the challenges they faced and the lessons they learned. This episode, artist Ryhia Dank and Mark Campbell, the creative director at Harper ANZ.
When I started painting, I asked my grandmother, I said, can I paint this? Can I make a living from this? Is this something I can continue? I just make sure that I know what I can paint. I make sure that my grandmother and my family have painted these things before me.
It's a privilege to be invited to work with someone whose culture is ultimately Australian. It can completely change the way that you look at your country and the way you operate here and the way you operate as a creative. You should totally have that experience because it will completely change you as a creative person, I think.
Ryhia and Mark worked on a children's picture book called Learning Country, a First Nations journey around Australia's traditional place names. This is episode 3, Designing On or Off Country.
My name is Ryhia Dank. I am the artist and designer behind Nardana. I am Gurenji Wakaya. And Nardana means women in Gurenji. I chose that name because within my story for Gurenji people, our main story comes from and is about 3 women. So I wanted to make sure that I just kept my stories from the start true to where I come from.
My name is Mark Campbell. I'm the creative director at HarperCollins, Australia and New Zealand, where I run the design team, and I also publish my own list of books, and Ryhia's book, Learning Country, is one of them.
My background is in architecture and graphic design. I went to uni for both. I have always loved to draw. I've always loved to be creative. However, when COVID started, we needed a bit of a source of income, and I started painting. So I only have started painting since 2020. I've grown to love painting. However, my heart does lie in graphic design and digital work. I absolutely love to create.
I've followed Ryhia for a while, just been a fan of her work. I think part of my job is I always I follow a lot of people, whether it's on social media or you just see their work. And I just always back catalog them and think, I wonder if there's going to be a great project for that person. And I want to do something really amazing with them. I feel like I always have 100 people that I'm thinking about that at the same time. And I think when we approached Ryhia to do this, she just felt like the right person. I think particularly because we were looking at words and place names. And she does this really great stuff with words. And I'd seen it online. I'd seen her post words that were just in her signature style. And I immediately saw the book as soon as I saw it visualized and it kind of came into being. And we just hoped that she wanted to do it as well.
I love typography, and that was one of my favourite subjects when I was doing graphic design at uni. And I did bits of different fonts here and there, and I shared it on social media. And I think that was how Mark found my page and found me. And he absolutely loved that. And that was the base, I guess, the structure behind Learning Country. It was based on the typography. And then he said, okay, we need to start helping the wider audience and wider Australia learn and see the importance behind our traditional place names.
The idea for the project came from, I think a majority of Australians have an interest in learning the place names, and that's become it's increased over the last few years. We do acknowledgements of country. We have country listed in our email signatures, and you look at Australia Post and you look at the ABC, and they've included place names in very prominent places for those companies. And I guess I thought there doesn't seem to be a book and there was a gap in the market. So I kind of thought we could do something around that. And what better place to start than with kids?
Aboriginal families within themselves, where oral That's how our stories were told orally and through rock paintings and different forms of storytelling. The pieces of art were the first books. That's how I've been brought up. That's what Mum and my family have told me. That's the first books. So within my family, keeping our stories and telling our stories is how we keep our culture and our language alive. Speaking English and then having different words of good energy through telling a story helps keep language alive, helps keep memories alive, helps keep our connection to country.
We hoped Ryhia would write the book as well as illustrate it, and that was put to her in the beginning. Would you also like to write it? And I think our hope was that she would say yes, and she did. And then I guess you look at her pedigree coming from, like, her mother is a famous writer.
Ryhia's mother is Deborah Dank. She's an author, an academic, known for her memoir, We Come With This Place. The book came out in 2022 and went on to win 4 prizes at the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards.
And maybe that's quite scary for her to also look at writing. And we did have a good chuckle about that, her and I, that she's now a published author as well as her mother, which I think she takes great pride in. We kind of didn't really have an idea of what the narrative would be or how she would write. We wanted it to come from her. And so it was kind of a very open brief. And then when she sent it back to us, the manuscript, and I think she was very nervous about it, she was sort of like, she'd put herself in the pages and in the words. And she was like, tell me what you think about this. And I think I read it and the editor, Nicola, read it. And we were like, this is amazing.
At first I was like, I can't believe they're actually going to trust me with writing this book, because I don't know, I've always heard of editors like coming in and just changing things. It was really daunting at first, because I thought that's what was going to happen. It was completely different. It was an honest, very open, very just relaxing working relationship. They had full trust in me and I had full trust in them.
I think it comes naturally to her writing. I think maybe when you're an illustrator or you're an artist, you think that writing isn't your thing. But until maybe someone gives you the opportunity to do that, you kind of don't really know if it's your thing or not. We wanted it to sound like her. So anything that she wanted to sound like herself, of course, we kept in. There was just some, I guess, being her first picture book or first book and a book for kids, there's some language that we were like, we advised her in terms of what would appeal to kids or be appropriate in terms of simplifying some of the language or terms. So it was more about that sort of thing. It wasn't about kind of it not sounding like her voice. I think that was kind of paramount.
So learning country, it was great because I got to learn a bit of these places that are around Australia. For instance, in Canberra, there's a big rock formation that them stayed in during the Ice Age and survived the Ice Age. I didn't know that before this book, so it got me to research more about other places. Mark took over, I'm extremely grateful, took over gaining the approval for all of the names that we could get approval for. There are Borroloola is where I'm from, where I grew up. I'm from the Barkly Tablelands, but Borroloola is where I grew up. But Boigu is one that I was able to gain approval for with my work with ILF.
ILF stands for the Indigenous Literary Foundation. It's a national charity of the Australian book industry. They work with remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across Australia. Ryhia's mother, Deborah Dank, was one of the founders of the ILF. Ryhia also works with them today as an ambassador in their Creators Program.
It was nice just being able to include different bits and pieces from Australia and try to include places that normally can't get left out of the everyday things, I guess.
So the book is a journey around Australia, and literally it does start in one point and then circle around, and then we land back in Ryhia's home country in Borroloola. We visit all the place names, and some are capital cities, some are smaller towns. We kind of wanted to make sure it was an even mix through states and territories. The words are really large on the page because the point of the book is to teach people these words. And they contain Ryhia's really beautiful kind of pattern and design, the way that she kind of puts things into the words, whether it's, graphics that speak to the animals or community or people that would have been at that place, or symbols and that sort of thing.
When illustrating these different places, I tried to look at the landscapes Within this book, you'll see that, the backgrounds are bright and vivid, but I tried to match those backgrounds with the feeling that I got from these places, and then also with the colours within the illustrations themselves, not just the background. So I think in, again, Canberra, there's an image of the snappy gums, snowy gums, and the bark is extremely colourful. And, I only saw it in photos. I was able to go down to Canberra. I saw the tree, and I pointed it out to Aaron, my husband, and I said, look, that's the tree that's in my book. It looked exactly the same, but I only illustrated off an image, to make sure the colours were correct. So it was amazing to be able to see the image and then to see it in real life. I tried to hopefully do all places justice within the artwork and in the illustrations.
Around that, we kind of wanted to kind of flesh it out into a bit more of a picture book. So it's still in her style. You get more of a sense of the place, whether it's the water for Gadigal, or whether it's the trees in Mianjin. And it was also really important that we kind of talked her through what kids find appealing in picture books. I mean, she's a parent. I'm a parent. She kind of knows what they like, but we talked about how it would be great to have particularly an animal on each spread or in each location that kids could find, and they could be kind of hidden. Just that kind of discoverability that kids love in books. And she thought that was really great. And also because animals are really important spirits to First Nations people, she was really able to advise us on colours we should use in the book. So you'll notice all the animals are black in the book, because she said that's an appropriate colour to use for animal spirits, whereas a lot of the rest of the artwork is really bright, full colour. There were lots of places that there are some places she would have been and some she hadn't, and I guess that is that challenge of designing on enough country that she's illustrating places that might not be familiar to her. That's a challenge in itself to do it justice, which I think she did.
There's so many different language groups. There's so many different mobs out there, and some people might not be able to paint certain things. And I'm not the gatekeeper. I'm not saying I'm the gatekeeper of who can paint or what they should paint. But for instance, when I started painting, I asked my grandmother, I said, can I paint this? Can I make a living from this? Is this something I can continue? I showed her the piece. That piece is actually the burn off one. That was my first piece I showed her, and she said yes. She said, you can continue. I just make sure that I know what I can paint. I make sure that my grandmother and my family have painted these things before me. If not, I will not paint them unless it's something that I've come up originally with. But I'm not going to go out there and take something else.
I think what Ryhia does really well is she's able to weave a very personal story into the book. It might be a book that is teaching people about traditional place names, and that seems kind of very functional, but it's her personal story, and she's also kind of encouraging people to learn. I mean, it's called Learning Country, but learning and listening and walking softly. I think these are things that are really important to Ryhia, and they're kind of dotted throughout the book. It is a book about being respectful and learning and listening and understanding what was here before. And I think that's kind of at the heart of what the book is trying to tell people, and hoping that people will kind of celebrate as well.
Ryhia and Mark both felt they had a really trusting working relationship. But again, that's not always the case. In other projects, Ryhia learned that some clients who want to work with First Nations artists have outdated ideas of what Aboriginal art is, or what it should be.
I feel like some clients come to, and again, not with solid lines, this was previous. Oh, can we make sure there are plenty of dots in this artwork? Yeah, it's extremely frustrating. But anyway, with that previous one, the producer said straight away, no, I'm going to talk to them. Let me talk to them. I shouldn't have to educate the client. Our storytelling is within the art. So it's not as simple as just spreading the dots out or adding a line here, or adding a symbol here. That doesn't mean anything. When a client comes to us and asks us for things like that, it might seem little to the client, but it's frustrating, extremely frustrating to the Aboriginal and First Nations artist. If it's painted by an Indigenous artist, it's Aboriginal art. That's how I see it. Doesn't matter whether it's got dots or not. It's Indigenous art if it's from an Indigenous or First Nations artist.
storytelling it's super important to First Nations cultures. It's kind of how knowledge is passed down, and it has been for thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of years. I think compared to where we were 10 years ago, there are a lot of publishers engaged with First Nations creatives, but I think there might be some hesitation still from some people engaging with it, either because they don't want to say the wrong thing or they don't know what the right thing to say is. But I don't think that should be something that holds you back from engaging with somebody whose work you think is incredible and that you think could be an amazing book just because you're afraid. I think that's the main thing that I have learnt, obviously working with Ryhia, but also working with other First Nations creatives in my career. It's a privilege to be invited to work with someone whose culture is ultimately Australian. It can completely change the way that you look at your country and the way you operate here and the way you operate as a creative. You should totally have that experience because it will completely change you as a creative person, I think. We're afraid of things all the time, and so it's perfectly acceptable to be afraid of things. I guess what's not acceptable is to not do anything about it. It all comes back to like whether you're just afraid or whether you are curious but afraid. If you're curious, then I think you're on the way. If I'm being honest, it's not good enough to be afraid. You probably have to go and get educated and learn a few things. And it's not that hard. And this book is trying to do that at a very base level, is trying to educate young people and by proxy, the old people in their lives, a very basic thing about a name of a place that you've known really well, but the name that it has had for 65,000 years before it had the name that it has now.
No, I'm extremely grateful for Solid Lines. They do a lot of work behind scenes, and when they handed me the brief, they were like, "We just love the typography. You go and do your thing," because that's why they came. They approached me just because they loved my work. They didn't want to change anything.
Ryhia Dank's book is called Learning Country, a First Nations journey around Australia's traditional place names. The book is published by Harper and available in all good bookstores and online. You can find out more of Ryhia's work through Solid Lines socials and website solidlines.agency. Our thanks to Ryhia and to Mark Campbell, the creative director at HarperCollins ANZ. On the next episode, we hear from artist Inoki and architecture firm BKK. They worked on a large set of glass panels at RMIT University that celebrate First Nations contributions to science and technology.
Within my work, I touch on a lot of queer themes, just as a way to be well, I'm already black and I face racism on the daily, and I don't get to see a lot of art of black queerness as well, because a lot of the time I think oh, I want to make the art for me that I didn't get to see growing up.
There's incredible cultural load as we know on First Nations people, so I don't think it's right to come into a project, bring the First Nations artists or consultants in and not be ready or have any background information yourself.
That's next up on Solid Yarns. This podcast was produced by Nicola St. John, Janik Rogers and Kimberly Lee at RMIT University in Naarm, Melbourne. Music by James Howard. Original music commissioned by Australian Dance Theatre for the Third. Choreographed by Artistic Director Daniel Riley. This program was made possible with support from the Alistair Swain Foundation. Find out more at alistairswainfoundation.org.